Thank you. Well, Brad certainly scared you. Ravi scared you more. So, but I'm here to say, okay, from AARP, we represent the largest consumer-based organization membership. We influence the 50 plus, that is our primary target, over 100 million members in the US alone, representing over 30 million, a third of that population, 22 million households. So I'm going to switch it up and say, maybe it's not all scary. Maybe there is opportunity that we have yet to tap into. So what I hope to do today is I'm going to share a little bit of the insights. And yes, they are mostly US-based, but most importantly, they're human-based. And every single one of us is aging every minute of every day. And you are older now than you were this morning when you started this conference. So my goal here is to say, how do we take advantage of that extra time that we have? And through this, I hope to come up with at least 3 action items that any of us can apply, no matter what country, what ethnicity, what culture you come from. So let's get started. This is about the power of age. And yes, you're absolutely right. We're aging. The older population is growing more than ever before. But maybe it's not all a burden. Maybe this is a new consumer market that you can have opportunity to grow business. In the US, yes, from in the last 100 years, we've grown 5 times faster for the people over 65. And you heard from Bradley, that 85 and older is the fastest growing population in the US. Did you know 100 is the second fastest growing population? And you also heard from Bradley, I love this number, that the US Department of Labor and Statistics looked at the age bands of the workforce, the civilian workforce, between now and 2030. There's only one age band that is growing, and that is not the under 30, it's not the 40, it's not the 60, it's the 75 and older. And as you heard from Bradley, it's nearly 100% growth rate. Every other age band is shrinking. So how do we take advantage of that older, more diverse, multi-generational workforce? And by the way, let's not forget that as you get older, we are real contributors to the economy, to society. So when AARP took a look at the longevity economy, how much do 50 and older contribute to the economy? In the US, that's $8.3 trillion. That is the 3rd largest economy behind the US and China. 56 cents of every consumer dollar is being spent by the 50 and older. And by the way, it's not just us spending money. We contribute over $745 billion of charitable contribution, unpaid caregiving, volunteering, that goes on. And I love the fact that we spend $179 billion on our grandchildren. So talk about the contribution to society. And a billion jobs are represented by the 50 and older. And guess what? We do spend money on technology. Since 2019, there's been a 130% increase in annual technology spend by the 50 and older. And according to AARP surveys of the 50 plus in the US, 98% of people 50 and older actually own a device. In fact, on average, your average 50 and older has at least 6 different devices. 82% own a smartphone. I love the fact that 70-some% of 70-year-olds actually own a smartphone. And 97% of the time, they are using that phone every single day. And that the most common reason that they're using their technology is staying connected with friends and family at about 78%. That's pretty comparable to the Gen Z, the Gen Y, the millennials. They use it about 80% of the time. But the really sad part, with all this positivity that is coming with aging and the assets that come with aging, we have not changed our story. We have not changed our narrative. For example, if you look at marketing and media imagery, only 5% of the marketing images ever show an older adult using technology. And yet I just told you how many people have a smartphone. Okay? Worse than that, if you actually look at the marketing imaging, if you are 50 and older, you are 7 times more likely to be seen as negative in the media. 7 out of 10 images show you alone. You're in the home, God forbid you're out in the community doing anything productive, and you're seen as dependent. Most likely, you're sitting in a doctor's office being told what to do, right? If you, only 15% of the images actually even show an older adult, even though it represents 46% of the population. And by the way, a third of the workforce is 50 and older, and yet only 4% of the images show somebody working with a coworker. 13% of images show an older adult at work versus 55% of images under 50 show you at work. Where are we in the community and the workforce when in fact we're there, but our story doesn't say so? So I'm here to say, Bradley's right, Ravi's right. Yes, we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but they're oftentimes framed as a burden, as a problem to be solved. Why can't we flip this and talk about this as the remarkable opportunity that aging brings? It turns out that if you actually look at the neuroscience, you have better pattern recognition, you have better creativity, better problem solving, better vocabulary. In short, your mother was right, you get wiser as you get older. At least that's what my mother always said. And I want to say, and why are we not creating and looking at what's in the secret sauce of aging? This happens to be my dad, who is currently 95 years old. That picture on the left is him dancing at my nephew's wedding when he was 90. At 95, he just went to my daughter's wedding 2 weeks ago, so Ravi and I share a lot in common in the last several weeks. He was dancing at that wedding, and I want you to know he signed up for tap dance classes, and he is tap dancing once a week. When my mother got sick when she was 90, this was my dad at 90, so it's never too late to get started. He said, I gotta get stronger. What if I have to help her up? He started exercising, resilience training, band training, etc. at the age of 90. There he is, an hour a day. He does weightlifting. He now goes to the gym twice a week. And I have to tell you, when you hug my dad, he's got the cutest muscles ever. And it doesn't mean he can't use technology. My dad is profoundly deaf. He's got a cochlear implant. When my mother passed away, he couldn't communicate. So what did he do? He got an iPhone where he does captioning. It pairs right to his head. He was staying at my house a few weeks ago. I found him lying in bed FaceTiming his friends. He's on family Zooms, and you know what? He takes an iPad to every doctor's visit with real-time captioning so he can follow the conversation. How simple a use of technology, and why are we not taking advantage of it? So I'm here to say, I think it's time to pivot. We need to start figuring out what creates that resiliency, like my dad, who at 95 said, you know, I think 99 is a really good number that he is now looking ahead forward to. So when I look at the resiliency, here's what I find really interesting, right? All of us talk, and this is a prevalence chart of a variety of conditions that we did in the AARP branded Medicare supplemental plan. So it is a unique population. We know in the healthcare system, what do we talk about? Hypertension. We talk about obesity, diabetes, stroke, heart disease. Okay, this is the prevalence rate. We now learn social determinants are really important. Things like access to care, low income, and it turns out some of those social isolation are even more prevalent than hypertension, one of the most chronic conditions that we talk about. But how many of you have actually looked at what I now call, see if we can put this up. Oops, sorry. How many of us actually, and sorry about the slides, a little slow. How many of us, and these are the red bars, actually measure things like sense of purpose? How sad it is that 35%, a third of our population, has no sense of purpose over 65. How many of us look at internal locus of control? That's the belief you can change things. 2/3 of us. say we have no internal or low internal locus of control? How about almost half of us have some degree of loneliness, and half of us have a negative perception of aging? And you will hear why that perception of aging is so important. So in fact, we actually surveyed our population, again, the AARP branded Medicare supplemental population, and we looked at what we called protective factors: resilience, optimism, internal locus of control, social connection, sense of purpose. And it turns out it doesn't matter which one of these you have. The more you have, the lower self-reported depression, the lower self-reported stress, the lower self-reported poor to fair health, the lower self-reported functional limitation. And if that doesn't get you on a cost basis, now this is cross-sectional, it's correlation, it's not causality. So I want to make sure I'm really sensitive to Joe's comments earlier. But it's almost stepwise with each cohort of population. And for every added protective factor that I just described, $1,356 less on an annual healthcare costs. So even if this is correlation, why are we not studying this hypothesis? So I like to say this is your first action item. Why are we not looking at emotional well-being? Not mental disease, not mental health, not depression, but why are we not looking at emotional well-being, resilience, the ability to cope with life's changes? Because trust me, we are not going to solve every challenge in life. But why is it, what's in that secret sauce? Because we all know older people who somehow can break a hip and bounce right back up and go back to playing pickleball. I don't get it, right? So there are many, many things you can look at. In our particular work, we're focused on 3 areas. I call them the 3 Ps: purpose, people, and possibilities. Why? Because they're measurable, they're modifiable, and they're meaningful to people. So let's start with the first one, purpose. Purpose in life is what gets you up in the morning, okay? It turns out that if you have a strong sense of purpose, you have fewer risk of stroke, you have better sleep, fewer hospitalization, fewer doctor visits. In fact, there's one study that just came out that looked at 62 factors of contribution to increased hospitalization. Did you know that if you help a friend or family anywhere from 100 to 199 hours a week, and this is off the Medicare retirement study, so 100 to 199 hours a week is 2 to 4 hours a week, where you're helping friends and family, you have a 27% lower risk of hospitalization. Physical activity lowered your rate by 20%, okay? If you volunteer just 2 hours a week, 100 hours a year, you have better physical activity, you have lower hospitalization, lower mortality, better physical functioning. And as I told you, 35% of our population is low in purpose, and that 35% costs us 12% more PMPM. I mean, this is an opportunity to both improve outcomes as well as lower healthcare costs. And this is a very recent study just published. It's a meta-analysis taking a look at having meaning in life and comparing that to the risk of dementia. And in this meta-analysis, for every point higher in having a sense of meaning in life, lowered the risk of dementia by 35%. Okay, there are 55 million people with dementia, costing us $1.3 trillion in the US. This is the one thing we know AARP members are the most afraid of, which is loss of their brain health. Okay, why are we not focusing on having value as you age instead of being a risk factor? So secondly, so sorry, I just described this was so important, I had to repeat it twice. The second P, it's people, the impact of loneliness. Now we know this, I love that the UK has a minister of loneliness. I think you know the numbers. If you're lonely, you have an 8-year shorter lifespan. We found in our study that loneliness was the single biggest predictor of dissatisfaction with your healthcare, and yet we're paying for satisfaction, and yet we never look at loneliness. Your mortality risk is greater with loneliness. And by the way, it costs us money. So I told you about half of our 40-some% are lonely. That's moderate and severe. If you take the category of the severely lonely, that 20% costs us 20% more PMPM, or at least is associated with. And AARP did a study taking a look at social isolation, which is the size of your network, costing us $6.7 billion. So that sense of camaraderie, and we know in the Harvard's longest study that started in the 1930s, said the single biggest factor to better health was having good relationships. So I'm going to pivot. This is still part of isolation and loneliness, but I'm going to give you action item number 2. One was about resiliency and emotional and the 3 Ps. The second, and when you think about isolation and loneliness, what is one of the biggest contributors to loneliness? In the older adult, it's hearing loss. It turns out that 2/3 of people 65 and 70 and older have clinically significant hearing loss, and yet only anywhere from 15 to 30% ever do anything about it. It costs us $133 billion in healthcare costs per year. If you look at productivity, $1 trillion globally is spent on the loss of productivity because you can't hear, you can't communicate. It's one of the most common reasons for early retirement. And we found, again, through that social isolation and loneliness, that hearing loss had a greater impact on your quality, negative impact on your quality of life than diabetes, heart disease, and all those other clinical conditions. And we now know from the Lancet Commission on Dementia that the single biggest factor of avoidable dementia is uncorrected hearing loss. 8% of dementia could be avoided if you treated hearing loss. Hypertension's only 2%. Increased physical activity, it's only 2%. The single biggest is hearing loss. And what's really nice is we can do something about it. I mean, if there's only one thing that you could do, I would say address hearing loss, given its prevalency. So you may all have heard about the ACHIEVE study that just got published this summer. It is a randomized controlled trial. Yay, Joe, it's a randomized controlled trial where they took older adults with hearing loss and randomized whether they got a hearing aid or not. And it turns out for not everybody, but for those older adults that were at risk for cognitive impairment, over 3 years was a 48% reduction of cognitive impairment, that it mediated cognitive impairment. And you know what? It's solvable now. And in the US, we now permit over-the-counter hearing aids for self-fitting, self-adjusting, which is cheaper than your standard hearing aids for mild to moderate hearing loss. Why are we not promoting something that is simple, easy to use? The third P is what I call the possibilities. It's a sense of optimism and a positive perception of aging. I mentioned how we are surrounded by this negative view of aging. On the flip side, if you have a positive view of aging, you are 44% more likely to fully recover from a severe disability. You have less anatomic evidence of dementia on a CT scan or an MRI, 80% reduction in cardiovascular risk. You live 7.5 years longer, and by the way, it costs us money. That 40% that have a negative perception of aging in our Medicare supplemental population costs us a whopping 33% more per member per month in healthcare costs. And there's one study that says that negative perception of aging contributes to about $63 billion in healthcare costs every single year. So I'd like to say the third actionable thing you have is let us tackle ageism. Age is an equity issue, the same as gender, the same as, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. We need to be talking about age and the value of multi-generational workforces, multi-generational households. And why do we ever not talk about age bringing joy? Who says you can't laugh if you're 85 years old? What about beauty? Who says you can't be fashionable? I love the fact that in Singapore, there's a modeling agency that if you're under 50, don't apply. They only take older models, and isn't it about connection? So here's our opportunity. Can we move from independence in the home to independence on the go? We learned in the pandemic, if you were stuck in the house, we were not happy campers. We were really unhappy. We wanted to be out and about in the community. Well, the same applies with aging. Look at what's possible in the innovation world. There's people making clothing with power boosters that help you get out of a chair. VR glasses that allow you to do real-time captioning so you can hear the talk. I talked about over-the-counter hearing aids. Fashionable legs, artificial legs, if you had an amputation, animatronic dogs and cats for companionship. My favorite is that thing that looks like bicycle wheels. That was designed by an older couple in Maine because she couldn't walk without her walker, but she couldn't go out on the trails. So what did she do? She and her husband designed a walker with bicycle wheels so that she could be out on the trails in Maine. Talk about joy, talk about the beauty, talk about the connection and the ability to do things with her husband. So here's what AARP is doing, and there's no reason you can't do it. AARP talked to Allure magazine. It's a women's beauty magazine for those of you who don't know that. They got Allure magazine to drop the word anti-aging in all of their ads, in all of their articles. Why are we anti-aging? They created a Getty image with Getty Imagery library with 1,400 images that depict older adults in a much more active way that really represents who they are right now. They talked to Soul Pancake, who said, we're gonna stop saying you look good for your age. How about you look good? It shouldn't matter what your age is. And you will hear tomorrow from my wonderful colleague, Michael Phillips, who's sitting back there, who's going to talk about technology, age-inclusive design, talk about the life cycle, and as John talked about, the stages of aging. And as we say at AARP, aging is the growth engine for business, for technology. We spend the money. I love, you'll see those little images that are on there. In Boston, which is where I live, the Commission on Elder Affairs several years ago, actually pre-pandemic, changed their name to the Age Strong Commission. Why is this about elderly affairs? Isn't it about aging strong? And they created all of these images, and I love that. That's Vinny, who's 83 years old. I'm a boxer. I still work out. I still pack a punch. I'm many, many things, and frail is not one of them. So Joanne Jenkins, who's our CEO, wrote a book about disrupting aging. My call to all of you is, can you join us to reframe that narrative of what aging is and spark the innovation to allow us to live our best lives? And as I like to say, I hate. Now, this is me personally, it's not AARP. I hate that word aging in place, right? It's really static. You're sitting in a little wheelchair staring out the window. Isn't it about thriving with motion and motility, right? So imagine if you're in a wheelchair, you might not be able to walk, but you can still read a book to a third grader, right? And even if you're cognitively impaired, it doesn't mean you still can't laugh. I love, there's a company that works with AARP on the age tech called Rendeavor. It's VR glasses. They put the VR glasses on a little old lady who hadn't talked or spoken because she had Alzheimer's and dementia in the nursing home. She put these on, and suddenly she stood up and started laughing uncontrollably. Why? Because she had a vision of puppies in her VR glasses. So that doesn't mean you cannot thrive spiritually, even if you can't do cognitively. You can't thrive emotionally, even if you can't do it physically. Or as I like to say, isn't it really about the 3 Ps? If you have a sense of purpose that gets you up in the morning, if you have people to do it with or who can support you, your possibility of tomorrow, your hope, your perception of how you age, that optimism become endless. And isn't that what we should be doing? So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.